this is news that's been coming out and people have been talking about it for a while. Jumping from history to like the potential end, though I don't think it's the end of the CW. I know a lot of
Mm-mm.
people are like, it's finally ending. They're burning it to the ground. It's going to be great. And it's like, well, not really. I mean, it's a sell to Next Star possibly. And they're still going to WB and Paramount now since they since they changed their name. Still gonna be creating content possibly. So it's not like the CW they're pulling the CW plug, but like I still want to know what this all means for the CW's future.
It's a lot for a network that's barely been around for 2 decades to like have all this like drama. Like you started out as a merger, and then we find out you've never made a profit, and we find out that you might be up for sale. It's a lot in a short span of time, relatively.
Yeah, the contrast there is that a lot of people have assumed the fact that it never made a profit means that it's being cancelled, if networks can be cancelled, if that's the right term. But the fact is, it may have never made a profit, but it is being sold. So, like, there's the contrast right there. There is somebody has a purpose for it, and very fact that it's being sold to potentially another TV network highlights that somebody has plans for it in the future, which is why I do have a good laugh every time there's a new show announced or there's a new renewal announced, and everyone's like, I thought this network was over, because it's not going to be over. I do think we are looking at a change in the way the CW conducts itself going forward, but I do not think that it will be the end of the network.
Same, it's an evolution, perhaps. I mean, the same thing did happen when UPN and WB merged, though there's a lot of history there about like that pivot. So like I wonder what the pivot is gonna be for the CW. If it even pivots, it might just go about the rest of its business as usual, except for perhaps some shows being in danger, like the DC TV shows.
Yeah, that's quite interesting to me, because it took me a while to like learn what this actually could mean going forward. But the fact is, the CW was a merger between the WB and CBS studios at the time. So it put shows of both of them, both networks on it that may not have been successful on the primary networks. But now that there's another network involved, could we see shows from potentially like other networks, like could ABC, NBC, Fox, could they use it for the same purpose that with the WB or Warner Brothers and CBS used it for? Because shows like the DC TV shows, for example, are so successful on the CW, and there's this belief that they wouldn't have been as successful on normal network TV. Like, with the exception of Supergirl, when was the last time you've seen like a major show hit so well? And then on outside of the CW, a major superhero show, and the fact that its ratings fell throughout the first season, so it had to be moved to the CW. Like, superhero shows might not exist if it, in today's day and age outside of the CW, because they just don't work. So I do think that going forward, if the CW does change, I think we can expect the DC TV shows to at least remain around for final seasons, whether they carry on long term. I think the CW is the best network for superhero shows in general, and I do think you'll see more DC TV shows sticking around on the CW for a time to come.
That's an
Well, that's
interesting thing
happy
to think
news.
about. Yeah, considering that now we're hearing that there's a potential for CW shows to move to HBO Max, which is kind of puzzling because we don't really know what the canceled by the CW to moving to HBO Max pipeline looks like. We haven't seen that, and we don't even know. They can say like, "Oh, this show's performing well on HBO Max," but we don't have any concrete evidence to back that up. Like, we don't see a top 10 on their homepage. We don't see streaming numbers, so we don't know what the quote Netflix bump looks like for CW shows on HBO Max. Like, is there an HBO Max bump? What shows would be most um applicable on to move to HBO Max? Like, are they going to move shows that are in danger of being canceled by the CW, or are they going to move successful ones that could use like a budget bump and would benefit from being on streaming. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I it's an interesting conversation because shows like Batwoman, which are steady in the ratings but lower than maybe some of the other bigger shows, a lot of people assume that it performs better on streaming. So if any were to move to HBO Max, that would be one of them. But then you have the other side of the argument, which Superman and Lois, which is the most watched show on the CW. A lot of people think that it should move to HBO Max because it's a CW show. It deserves better than that, which isn't right, because the CW is the one producing it. Superman and Lois is performing very, very well because of the CW. I do think of all the shows on the CW, Superman and Lois looks most like a HBO Max show. So, and according to stats, I don't know if they're official, it does perform well. So I do think if we saw any move, it could be that. But on the other end of the argument, the CW is not going to get rid of their most successful show, so it will be sticking around.
Yeah, and then like Casey Bloys, who's the content chief of HBO and HBO Max, like recently had an interview with the Hollywood Reporter where he discuss isn't really a word. He gave that vague answer that they have to give when they can't give you too much information. But he was saying that he didn't know anything about the sale because he's not involved in the talks, but that the Greg Berlanti shows do really well on HBO Max, so they consider them to be valuable. But like when I take in that quote, I'm like, okay, so we know that they're valuable, but they're also valuable because they perform well for the CW. Making that hop to HBO Max might be a problem for the shows that are holding steady, like you said, with Batwoman. But like, if it went to streaming only, I don't know how that would work out, especially with international fans.
Yeah, it's a bit of an interesting puzzle because I feel like the reason that the Arrowverse shows are so successful outside of in their prime, they had incredible numbers on the CW, but over time, everything edges, other ratings go down. But I feel like the reason that they're so successful is because they're part of this like global property. Everybody watches the DC shows. Everybody knows of them at least. And I think things like streaming deals on Netflix or worldwide have helped with that. I personally don't have them on Netflix in my neck of the woods, but like they are on Netflix around the world. And then that extends to other shows, which we'll talk about in a moment, which are globally Netflix shows. But with shows like Batwoman, they're exclusive to HBO Max after its CW run. More of these modern shows, ever since this new Warner Brothers deal came into effect, that only allows the CW shows then to go on to HBO Max. I worry about that because HBO Max isn't as well established a brand as Netflix is. And even though it is getting there, it's not available in other areas in the world, which means shows like Batwoman, which do reportedly do well on streaming, may not reach as wide an audience if it was an exclusively HBO Max show. Of course, there are international TV deals around the world, but it does feel like they're trying to push towards making HBO Max more available. But the truth is that it isn't there yet. So shows exclusive to HBO Max, even in its US audience, I think would be a mistake, because sometimes the reason that those shows are so reliable and easy to tune into is because they're on TV. So to move them to a streaming service that not everybody has yet would risk diluting the audience even further.
I would say the international audience carries this network on its back. Like my beloved show Dynasty would probably not be on today if people around the world didn't watch it on Netflix. That's why it's still on. And I think it would alienate so many fan bases to just pick up an established show and move it to a streaming service. Like that takes promotion, and we know that they don't favor promo, not to get shady, but
No, they don't. I mean, there's been an uptick recently of promo. I feel like I've been seeing some shows and on like YouTube ads and getting more article interviews. I'm like, well, we are truly promoting our shows a little bit more. I'm very happy. I'm sure the fandoms are happy. I want to continue to see it. But I'm not scared for the CW's lineup. I think most of its lineup is aged, if we're being honest. But if they're going to be sold, then the shows that are on are probably going to get like final seasons, and like we'll know that ahead of time, and they'll be able to finish. Like it's not going to be a mass cancellation at all. But it does make you wonder about like the CW's future, especially when like they keep dropping all this news about what's in development, what pilots they ordered. Um, like All American Homecoming is going to be starting on Monday, so it's like yet another show. You have Tom Swift coming. So I'm not sure when Tom Swift is coming, but it's supposed to be coming in 2022. So I'm going to assume the fall. So when you think about all that, it's like the CW is not operating like they're getting shut down sometime in the summer. Like they're operating business as usual. So I'm not necessarily scared of the direction that it's going in.
No, me neither. And I think that's really what highlights there is a future for the CW, because at the end of the day, what network would start greenlighting shows if they didn't think they were going to be here for it? Like there are a lot to think of. There's a lot to think about in terms of that, and cast and production, right? And like these shows are going to live on, and the belief is that they will live on the CW. Again, a TV network is rumored to be buying it, so, or the majority share. It will still exist as some kind of entity, and shows like Tom Swift, which has been in development for a while. The fact that also that they added a CW veteran to the cast, so it highlights that they have faith in their properties going forward. And you could use the Arrowverse example as well, as the original Arrowverse as it has been dormant for a while, other than the established shows. And now we have this potential Just As You show coming in the future, which is led by an Arrowverse vet and David Ramsey. So you can see the CW is relying on their familiarity at the moment. So why would they continue this? Why would they branch out even further after being dormant for a little while if they didn't think there was a future there for them?
Maybe they're just trying to make it look extra tasty for a buyer. Like, look at all these spinoffs. We have Ashley Murray and Tom Swift. We're going to get back in the supernatural universe, more DC. They're like, the party's over here.